know who needs to hear this, but I'm pretty sure there are many of us in midlife that need to hear this. Most of what is going to help you at this stage in growth is that you're going to slog it out. You're just going to show up for yourself every single day. If you don't, then that's where the midlife crisis happens, right? So I want to give you permission to just show up even when you don't understand what's happening, because that really is what's going to gift you a centered midlife. And it certainly will help you to build self-worth from the inside out. So if you're interested in hearing what are some of my thoughts on how you can accomplish this in midlife, keep listening. Welcome. You're listening to The Centered Midlife, a podcast that teaches women in midlife to unapologetically stop silencing their dreams and start designing the lives they want to live in. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie, and as a clinical psychologist of the last 2 decades and a twice divorced single mother myself, I not only know how hard it can feel heading into midlife, I am living it right here with you. I have taken all the many failed attempts and lessons learned in my own life and combine it with my extensive clinical experience to give you the tools you need to make midlife the best time in your life. No joke. So let's get started. Welcome back to The Centered Midlife. So in the last few podcasts, I've been talking about this concept, and last time I even went through some of the statistics of how childhood trauma, childhood issues seem to get, tied to worsened midlife physical symptoms for sure, but even our emotional health symptoms that we're experiencing. And I want to take a little step back because people hear trauma and people have a very specific idea of what that means. And I tried to go through the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, and the study that looked at those 10 different things to help you understand that really only 4 of them are related to abuse and neglect. And the rest of them are, some of are things that happen to many of us, like divorce, that we came from a divorced family. And that's an adverse childhood experience. But I want to think about the idea of what trauma really is. We have it in our head that trauma is the thing that happens to us out here, right? It's the bad experience. And then we can start to be comparative with other people well, my trauma, I don't really have trauma. I grew up in a pretty good household, right? Nothing really bad happened to me. Trauma, though, is not the stuff that happens to us. And there is some really bad stuff happening all the time, right? Right now, for instance. I mean, good God, I can't even look at the news and now feel traumatized at this stage. 2026 has not been an easy year. 2025 wasn't a really great year either, but 2026 definitely not easy, okay? And so if you're going through midlife at the same time, wow, you can feel like it's a slog day in and day out. And that is a really good evidence that it is not the stuff that's happening to us that creates trauma. It is whether or not we have the resources to manage what's happening. In childhood, very specifically, it isn't just internal resources, but it's whether or not there were people around, caregivers in particular, that helped you to manage what you were going through, that helped to attune you and regulate you to a different way of showing up in those moments. If you were not only abused, but then left to manage what happened to you all by yourself, you were in worse shape than if you were in a family that there was abuse, but there was also attunement. I know that sounds crazy, but there are a lot of families that yell a lot, right? And love hard. And if you loved hard enough, you might have helped that child to overcompensate the negativity that was happening in the verbal abuse in the household. this blows people's minds when I do therapy with them as a trauma therapist. And I have had this conversation across the couch from so many people that they're fighting me. Like, what I went through wasn't that bad. Doc, it wasn't that bad. I was adopted, and I felt like the outsider because then they had kids, but I had food on the table. I had good clothes. I lived in a middle class home. True. All things were true. And you were the outsider in that family. And you had been adopted, which in and of itself was a traumatic experience. And if you didn't feel connected, attached to your caregivers, then you probably didn't learn how to regulate. And if you didn't learn how to regulate, and then you felt more like an outsider as they had new kids and the attention went to them, there was more injury that was added on top of that. And so you don't even really have to have had horrible experiences. It really is about, did you have empathic people? Did they attune with you? Did they say, hey, this looks really hard, and I don't know if I can fix it, but I'll sit in it with you? And if those people weren't your caregivers and you were a little bit older, did you have friends? Did you have other safe adults, teachers, coaches, anybody in your life, neighbors, parents of friends that were helping you to learn how to manage all of this psychologically? If the answer more times was no than yes, then the internal experience of trauma or a trauma disorder starts to develop when you don't have the resources to manage all of it. And then you get kind of stuck in some patterns of showing up in traumatic or trauma-inducing situations into your future, anything that overwhelms you emotionally. You start to have kind of a rigid pattern of how you show up to it over time, in large part because your body is going into survival mode quicker than others. It's interpreting the environment as unsafe faster than others. It's hyper vigilant is what we call that. It's not just vigilant, like making sure to, look both ways when I cross the street kind of thing. No, like, you're going into life expecting another shoe to drop. You're going into life. Does this sound like you? You're going into life looking for, when is the next bad thing going to happen? And that hypervigilance over time starts to also kind of rub into what I've talked about on the podcast, which is cognitive bias. And that's the brain's kind of lazy way of, there's way too many things coming at us all the time that if we tell it to be looking for something in particular, it can do this thing where it puts on blinders. If you're watching me on the video, like, I have my hands up on either side. So I can't see what's happening out here. I can only see what's happening in front of me. And that bias then starts to pick up only on the thing I'm talking to myself about. So if you're hyper vigilantly worried about, when is the next person going to abandon me? Right? Never really attached well in my family. When's the next friend going to leave me? When's the next boyfriend going to leave me? When's the, next event where all my friends scatter to the wind going to happen? You start to only see when those things are happening. What you're not seeing, what your brain is kind of, because it just can't pull it all in at the same time, and it got lazy and didn't want to see what was out here. What it's not seeing is when people show you kindnesses and you didn't expect it, when small sparks do fly in acquaintanceships that could become friendships. You're not going to see that because you don't have the capacity for it, and your brain in its survival mode stays in this cognitive bias of looking for the next shoe to drop in your relationships, right? So these are the kinds of things that are kind of folded into those statistics I talked about. We're like 10 times more likely to have worse symptoms if we've had like 4 of those ACE score on our ACEs score. Like, if we have a 4 or more, we're like going to have horrible symptoms, right? And why does it connect to the medical stuff? Well, it connects to the medical stuff because the psychological is, the same neurotransmitters are hormones, and they're in the hormonal system. And that hormonal system then impacts how other systems are working. There's a whole kind of hierarchy of our hormones, and some of the higher ones are the sex hormones for both men and women, right? And so for us, it's estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, much lower levels, but all those androgens of different kinds kind of control what else is getting released and when it's getting released. Why do women have so many thyroid problems? Because all of those things cross. And adrenaline, also a hormone released by the adrenal glands during stress, is very caustic and also sends messages across our nervous system to shut this down, turn this on, keep this hypervigilant, make this go offline a little bit. And then things like our digestion and our immune systems get compromised because they are, lower down on that hierarchy, not getting the attention or the focus or the chemicals that they need to function correctly, while our body is trying to basically stay alive because we're in fight or flight in that high stress environment. Well, you do that chronically year after year after year after year. By the time you hit midlife, you're talking about major immune disorders, autoimmune disorders, which women are 80% more likely to have. And that's childhood trauma or not, right? I mean, like, none of this is an accident, ladies, none of it. And we hit this point in midlife, and I just wanted to come on today and really help you understand it doesn't take much, right? So you could have, if some of these things in your childhood happened earlier on, the earlier they happened, the less resource internally that you had. Therefore, the more you needed the people around you to come and meet your needs. And if there was an absence of that, because they were good parents, but it was Generation X and they locked the door and we drank from hoses and played all day outside. They weren't regulating you emotionally while the neighbor boy was abusing you because they, A, didn't know what was happening, and B, kind of the fabric of how parenting worked was a lot more hands off then, right? There was not helicopter parents or lawnmower parents or any of those things. None of it. They just were very hands off. And that was the culture. That was natural. Right? And then you feed in things like socioeconomic status, and that changed how much involvement or non-involvement. Then you put in things like culture and ethnic background, and that changes all of that, right? So like there's so many layers to why are we the way we are today. And I strongly suggest, if you're curious about any of this, go see somebody like me that's a mental health clinician that's licensed, and talk it through and walk it back and see if anything's like this or having a connection to how you're experiencing your midlife today. But I started the show by talking about like what I really think is most helpful at this time in our life is to just show up even though we don't know. That's really all it is. Like, there are days, it's wild, right? There are days that I have really good days. I had a Friday, a couple Fridays ago, that I literally was just like sitting at my office desk and looking out the window. It was a nice day, looking like spring. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I really like my job. And, my life is actually going really well. Like, yeah, this is fantastic. Like, I have to hold on to this moment here and remember to come back to this when I have a bad moment. Well, lo and behold, literally the next Friday, so just this past Friday, I left my office early after slapping my laptop down, crying from how difficult my day had been. Again, very emotional during this stage of my life. Even when I'm well controlled in my meds, I don't hold it all together. But to some extent, I feel like that's growth for me. Because what I did last Friday was I cried it out. I thought it through. I let myself like have the feeling state that I needed. And then I chose the path of, now how am I going to get up, pick myself up by my bootstraps and go be me anyway? Because I had to come home, get ready and go out with colleagues. That was something that had been planned for ages. I also had to come home after that, and it just so happened it was that time of the month for my daughter, and something had rubbed her the wrong way, and I could just tell she was a little off. And so after having had a hard day at work and then had to, put my mask on and do what I had to do to go out with my colleagues and deal with that, and great time, right? But I was already exhausted. Like, I could have put the jammies on and gone to bed. She needed me. So for a good hour and a half, she and I had a very long and emotional conversation, and there were tears shed, and it was a difficult one. It was good. It ended up well. And it was a moment of mothering that I couldn't phone in. I mean, had I phoned it in, I'd have been doing to her the things my parents did, which was very hands off, very neglectful. Let me introspect and figure all that stuff out on my own. And that is the trauma that then now causes me to want to hide away from bad days like I had this past Friday. And I don't want to do that to myself anymore. I don't. So I don't want to do that to her. I want to create a better basis of resource for her than I had for me, because I would like her to get to 50 and have a different feel for what she could do. But I want you to just know, like, that is its own skill. And even more than that, there is embedded in what caused some of this problem another solution, which is connection. And women don't do it well. In fact, I want to just say, I'm going to say it, we have been acculturated not to do it well, which seems kind of counterintuitive, but go with me for a second. Women are the connectors, right? Like, we are the ones that have our hands in all the pots. So we're taking care of stuff at work, taking care of stuff at home, taking care of stuff in our communities. And for all intents and purposes, we're on all the, text lists and phone lists, and we're, keeping in connection with all these people, but it's always in service to these roles. And my opinion of these roles, honestly, my professional opinion of these roles is a lot of them are the survival mechanisms, the blinders that I talked about earlier that give us cognitive bias. Like, I can be in my role at work, and then I can push out all of this extra stuff that's bothering me. Right? I can be in my role with my kids and doing the tasks, but I can push out all of the inequity that I feel, say, in a marriage where the other partner isn't doing as much. These roles, when we're kind of blind to what all goes into it and how much it takes out of us, and that it isn't really paying us back the way that we think it is, that's an important piece to how we function day to day with our cognitive bias and our blinders on. But over time, it impacts us negatively, right? So while on the outside, it would look like we're connected, we're only connected within the context of these survival mode roles a lot of the time. We're not picking up the phone when we're, crying over something that happened and saying, I just need someone. I need to connect. I need to feel better. I need to share this. And embedded in some of the adverse childhood experience study material is the attachment theory pieces that, like, if someone, a caregiver, a friend, a safe adult had been around to co-regulate with us, which all that means is somebody comes in, sees that we're hurt, and is empathic enough to, like, sit in it with us. And even if they can't fix it, just the sheer connection, the yoking of that pain makes it easier on us, right? It's a very simple thing, but it's a very potent resource when we're feeling overwhelmed, when the stress is outweighing what we've got to take it on. And women have been acculturated now over time to be so invested in the roles, so in the blinders, that we are only doing the things that are performative. We are hustling. We are showing our worthiness in our human doing instead of being a human being. And in a moment like I had last Friday, what really was needed was just connection, right? So I reached out. I did. I talked to a colleague. I talked to a friend. I connected with a relative at one point during the day, and none of them had to know the whole story. In fact, one of them never knew any of the story till much later, because I just was like on my way out the door to go meet with the colleagues, and I'm like, can't stir it up. I put my mask on. I'm ready to go. I got to go do this thing over here. I have to choose my role as a way to insulate myself from the emotional impact of what happened to me today. But I'm choosing it, right? I'm not doing it blindly. I'm not feeding it like a blinder. I've kept my eyes wide open. I know it's out here, and I'll have to still keep managing how it made me feel. But that one person didn't even know why it was that I had reached out on a Friday when I almost never do, right? So I think that connection and just doing things when we don't know why it's happening, but keep showing up for ourselves, that those are very powerful strategies during midlife. Because the truth of the matter is, we're also just going to have to do this and navigate it, whether we get it or not. Whether you have a podcast you're listening to that's like giving you aha moments or not, you still have to show up and do your life, right? But I just want to invite you to do that with intention, to say, okay, I'm really not doing well right now, but I'm just going to keep showing up for myself. I know I got to slog this through. I'm going to stay aware. I'm going to try to stay kind to myself. That compassion for yourself when you're not doing so well, that is so, so important. And when you really just feel like I think it's above my pay grade, like I cannot get my emotions under control. I can't handle this. Before you reach for a glass of wine, before you sit down in front of the television to do a Netflix marathon, before you start to doom scroll with your phone, I want you to reach out to at least one person. And if you can, another woman in midlife. Somebody that has some awareness of how much this has hit you below the belt. And even if you don't tell them all the detail, could at least, when you hear them say, oh, I get it. I see why you're struggling. Like that something happened at work and you didn't feel like appreciated and you didn't feel like somebody had, taken your opinion into consideration, whatever it is, right? Like I get how that feels at 50 as a woman, right? Talking to another woman who's been there and understands, there's a lot of empathy that is communicated without anything ever being said, right? So just one person before you get the glass of wine, before you do the doom scroll, before you head for Netflix, before you head out in your role to be the mom or be the whatever that you need to be, so you can just numb yourself by overworking, overdoing, hustling, connect with one person, right? And that action is showing up for yourself, even when you don't know why you are feeling the way you're feeling. And I think if you just keep doing one step like that at a time, it's amazing how things start to flow a little bit better. They feel a little bit better and they flow a little bit better over time so that you too can start and walk into this centered midlife where you are building the worth from the inside out. Because I am a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Minnesota, I have to make sure at the end of each of these episodes that I give you the disclaimer that none of the material that I talk about in these podcasts is meant to replace any kind of therapy or formal medical or mental health treatment. And in fact, anything that I offer on my website, my coaching programs, any kind of psychoeducational materials that I release are not a replacement for that level of care. So just take that into account when you listen. This is information for you, and hopefully you find it of value, both as an educational tool and for your entertainment. And I also want to mention that if anyone you know is in a mental health crisis, needs additional help, I always include these two crisis resources. They're available to anybody. Pick up the phone and dial 988 for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And you can always visit their website at suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Additionally, there's actually a crisis text line. So if you're not somebody that likes to pick up the phone, text HOME, home, to 741-741 to the crisis text line. And you can find them online at crisistextline.org. Thank you for listening to my podcast. And I hope that you like and follow me wherever you get your podcasts, and maybe consider leaving me a review. It always helps me to keep this podcast relevant when I know what you want to hear about.